Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The federal government has an update as to how many Canadians have been airlifted from war-torn Sudan. The National Citizens Inquiry into the government's handling of the pandemic continues, this time in Red Deer, Alberta. And a huge funding announcement of over $2 million for the village of Sterling. We will explain what the money will be going towards.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has made a pledge to not raise taxes. Smith says that includes both personal and business taxes. That is, if she and her party are re-elected next month in the upcoming provincial election. Smith says her government would formalize a pledge by expanding the Taxpayer Protection Act to include personal and business income taxes to ensure no future government could increase income taxes without the approval from Albertans in a referendum. Smith says word is getting out about the Alberta Advantage.
The most recent data from Stats Can shows that we've seen 6 consecutive quarters of positive migration from other provinces, and that doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't come about by wishful thinking. The reality is Alberta's economy has momentum because of policies that are put in place by our United Conservative government.
Premier Smith adds that under UCP government, business taxes have decreased. She says many business owners tell her that they are reaching record levels when it comes to revenue. Smith also says under her government, there will also be no introduction of a provincial sales tax. Now, speaking of taxpayers' news, it appears as though the Canadian Taxpayers Federation is not impressed with the recent announcement that 70% of the new arena and event centre being built in Calgary will be taxpayer funded. Chris Sims is the Alberta director with the CTF, and she says taxpayers shouldn't be supporting millionaires.
You know, NHL hockey players, guys that are playing for the Calgary Flames, they make millions of dollars per year. The Calgary Flames team is worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So why are hardworking, struggling taxpayers of Calgary being handed a bill and expected to build a new NHL rink for them? Taxpayers should not be on the hook to build NHL arenas. If you take a look at what the city of Calgary is spending here, it's really eye-popping because back in 2019, they were going to spend around $275 million on this NHL rink. Now, the cost to the city alone is more than $530 million. That's almost doubled since 2019. And we're still concerned that this is just the initial price tag, that this price tag is probably going to balloon again, just like it did back in 2019. We don't think this is a good deal for Calgary taxpayers and Alberta taxpayers.
The village of Sterling here in southwestern Alberta received close to $2.2 million in funding from the Alberta government on Wednesday morning. The money is going towards upgrading for the village's wastewater lift station and force main, or the pipelines that convey wastewater. Video journalist Micah Quinn was in Sterling and chatted with local government officials about why the big funding announcement is so vital.
No one really cares what's going on under the ground underneath us right here until it backs up into your basement.
The funding of close to $2.2 million comes from the Alberta Municipal Water Wastewater Partnership. Trevor Lewington, the mayor of Sterling, told us this announcement is vital for critical infrastructure that is much needed in the village.
It allows us additional capacity, first of all, to address extreme weather events, so that adding a pump here, adding capacity to our system to remove water from the community is critical when it comes to extreme weather. But more importantly, it sets us up for future growth. It allows us to look at future residential and commercial development. So this is really an enabling investment by the Governor of Alberta.
Grant Hunter, the Alberta Associate Minister of Red Tape Reduction, says this money for the village of Sterling is part of a larger group of funding for areas across Alberta, which provides $179.5 million in grants across our province to support 122 road, bridge, community airport, and water projects.
It is something that is very important for development and for houses. When homes are built, when commercial areas are built out, they need to have this.
Lewington says the funding of almost $2.2 million from the Alberta government represents 71% of the total project cost, and the village of Sterling will still have to come up with the remaining 29%. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The National Citizens Inquiry into the government's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic continued with a stop in central Alberta. BCN producer Kaylin Steele is covering the event and has more. Kaylin.
Thanks, Hal. We're here on location in Red Deer, one of the hotels downtown. Just on the hallway here behind me is where a slew of witnesses will be ushered into this room so they can testify in front of over 100 members of the public so they can hear their firsthand accounts of how the response to the COVID pandemic affected their lives.
A bunch of our snipers were removed, including a master sniper who trained our snipers, special forces. The guy who made the longest shot on record right now was removed because he wouldn't take the vaccine. So we've got pilots. We've spent millions of dollars training these pilots, and they're not allowed to fly if they're still in, or they were removed. How do we afford this? We can't afford this. There's people who specialize in removing mines off of ships.
Right.
You know, what risk were they? They have their own oxygen and they're under the water. What risk were they to their shipmates to inspect hulls and this kind of thing?
So many people don't have a voice, and they want to actually be heard and tell their story. There's so many people who are affected, and I can tell you, for every person who gets up and testifies, there's literally thousands of people who are affected by it. So people who have been affected can actually watch and feel by proxy that they're being heard or they're not alone. But hopefully also there's a bunch of people who have closed their minds or moved on, thinking that the whole COVID narrative has moved on, and they don't understand that it still very much has an impact, not just on many individuals, but our future as a society.
The National Citizens Inquiry will continue here in Red Deer until Friday.
Thanks so much, Kaylin. That was BCN producer Kaylin Steele, who's covering the National Citizens Inquiry of the government's handling of the pandemic, which is taking place in central Alberta. The inquiry will then move on to Vancouver, Quebec City, and Ottawa next month. Well, it was another beautiful spring-like day across much of southwestern Alberta again today. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, the warmer temperatures may continue, but there's also a slight chance of some moisture developing.
Yes, a 60% chance of showers is expected this evening, and more showers expected on Thursday. Now, Thursday, also our cooler day for the week. We are looking at only a high of 12 degrees. Overnight low 2 degrees, and also coupled with a lot of wind. We're looking at winds from the west at 60 kilometers per hour and winds from the northwest at 80 so going to be a very windy one, especially with those cross winds expected. Windy also into Thursday morning as we're looking at 80 winds, but diminishing to about 50 by noon, and then of course coupled with that 60% chance of showers. For the rest of the week though, actually looking pretty good. I'll be back later on in the show to give you all those details, and spoiler alert, it's going to get pretty hot by next week. Hal?
Looking forward to that. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Hearing Life Canada held a grand opening on Wednesday morning for their brand new location in West Lethbridge. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was held marking the official opening of the new space. A company spokesperson with Hearing Life Canada says it's exciting to finally have this location open to welcome residents from the city's west side.
Really beautiful clinic, and the services that we've offered so far since opening have been marvelous. I think people have really enjoyed the location, it's close to home, and the service that's provided by the folks that work here. We have a number of clinics in the other side of Lethbridge. But this is the first one in the west, so that's the exciting part for us.
Local resident Jim Jepson says having this new facility is pretty good because it's important to have your hearing checked.
doesn't just happen for older people. It's people who are younger, especially those that are in working environments where there's a lot of noise and that can affect their hearing. So I think it's very important to have this facility here in West Lethbridge. A lot of folks, especially those that are a little bit older, maybe get a little nervous going across Whoop Up Drive or going over to Highway 3 to take the other bridge. So it's really important to be able to just come here in the west side, and for others who maybe just want to come to the west side.
The facility had a soft opening back in February to residents and is located on Highlands Boulevard. The University of Lethbridge is partnering with the Helen Schuler Nature Centre for their second annual 3-part immersive series on coulee plant identification. The course is an opportunity for people to check out some of the local floral that grows in our coulees.
Nature appreciation and getting out into nature is very, very important. I think we're all, sort of guilty of getting stuck behind our screens and not maybe making it out into nature as much as we should. And I have a dog. I take her to the dog park, and quite often I hear people just chatting and pointing out the flowers, saying, I wonder what that is, or, I wonder what the name of that is. And so having a focus in terms of learning the names and how to identify flowers that grow here in Lethbridge, I think is important. And also it does give people the opportunity to get outside and just enjoy nature a bit.
Looking forward to that. The course will be taking place starting on May 24th, and more details can be found on our website, bridgecitynews.ca. An investigative study completed by the Better Business Bureau has uncovered some huge scams when it comes to timeshares and vacation club sales. The BBB says there have been nearly 30,000 complaints across North America, with $32 million being disputed. There have also been close to 10,000 negative reviews from those who have been reported to the BBB about timeshare sales scams. Officials with the Better Business Bureau of Southern Alberta told us there are ways you can protect yourself if you're considering a timeshare.
The first and best tip is, do you really want a timeshare? It's not an investment. It's not a real estate investment. It's going to cost you money. There's usually fees, annual fees attached. There's a lot of limitations around when you can use them. So probably the best advice is don't sign up under those circumstances. The average cost to acquire a timeshare is $24,000. What we've heard from a lot of consumers is they sign up for one of these things and they never use them. Another great tip is, again, always do your research. Make sure you're dealing with a legitimate company. Don't be in a hurry to sign any documents. Take the information away. Give yourself at least 24 hours, probably more like a week, to consider it. Talk to other people, do research about the company that's making the offer.
Staff with the Better Business Bureau say there have also been 1,160 scam tracker reports with losses of $3.5 million related to the timeshare industry. An Edmonton man suspected of trafficking teenagers faces over 30 charges. Alert says following a year-long investigation, 22-year-old Philip Matombo faces a total of 34 charges in connection with the sexual exploitation of two 15-year-old girls. The charges include human trafficking, a person under the age of 18, sexual assault, sexual interference, distributing child pornography, and uttering death threats. Officials say the victims believe they were in a relationship with a suspect.
They believed that they were boyfriend, girlfriend. They thought that their trafficker was in love with them. They were in love with their trafficker. And he really used their emotions to manipulate them and have them believe that what they were doing was for the better good of their relationship and to continue their relationship, make them money so that they can be together. Philip Matombo is a 22-year-old male who is a resident of Edmonton, but he comes from Eastern Canada. He has ties to Toronto. No criminal record prior to this. He's currently in custody in jail because he keeps breaching his conditions and keeps contacting or attempting to contact the victims.
Through their investigation, police identified 2 additional underage girls who Matombo had attempted to lure into the sex trade. The Alberta government says it is creating a $2 million task force made up of sheriffs to track down and arrest those accused or convicted of serious crimes. The province says the Fugitive Apprehension Sheriff Support Team will work with local police to apprehend the suspects. 20 positions will be created within a year, with around half based in Calgary and the other half in Edmonton. Public Safety Minister Mike Ellis says there are around 4,200 violent offenders with outstanding warrants here in Alberta. The Canadian Urban Transit Association says cities need to hire more security officers for public transit systems. The group says more power needs to be given to help curb dangerous behavior on our city's buses and trains.
Issues such as poverty, homelessness, substance abuse, and mental health, when left unaddressed, is impacting transit systems. We know that no single solution can address the complex issue of violence on public transit. But with that in mind, people in every city across Canada have the right to get around their community without fear for their personal safety. When it comes to customer and staff safety, we need to enhance staff visibility on transit properties for our riders and invest in safety and security and enforcement positions across Canada. We also need to ensure that regulations and bylaws are in place that give police officers or special constables the ability to curb dangerous and unlawful behavior on transit systems.
The Alberta government is looking at the potential of involuntary addictions treatment. That's according to our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson. Dawson says this controversial move is being considered to help those who are hooked on a wide range of drugs, including opioids.
Simply put, involuntary treatment would be you not get arrested necessarily, but you would get seized and put in a treatment facility. It has been really controversial because critics of this say that, look, this is a violation of individual rights. Like, people have, choices in what they do in life, and why should the government be stepping in to put a stop to this? This isn't a sure thing. The government says it's still doing lots of consultation on it. I'm sure there's going to be legal and charter issues that arise from such a program if it goes ahead. So not set in stone yet, but certainly another part of this conversation about the drug issue in the province right now, which is obviously on a lot of people's radars.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson, and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our broadcast. The federal government now confirms that more than 100 Canadians have been airlifted out of war-torn Sudan. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says the government has been in contact with hundreds of Canadians who are still there.
Of the 1,700 people that have been contacted, 550 have asked for assistance. 100 of them have already left Sudan. And so therefore, we will continue to engage because the ceasefire, which is holding while the situation is still fragile, is helping evacuation efforts. We are providing help different ways. The first one is through the fact that many people that are not necessarily in Khartoum and closer to borders of neighboring countries are leaving by themselves. So Global Affairs and our diplomats are helping them to have access to information. For example, where is the next fuel station and if it's open or not? Or where's the next pharmacy, if it's open or not? So we're working on that to help Canadians going, for example, to South Sudan or Egypt or other neighboring countries. I've already negotiated safe passage with many countries.
Praying they make it home safely. Well, the NHL playoffs continued, and the Edmonton Oilers have grabbed a 3-2 series lead over the LA Kings following a huge 6-3 win in Edmonton. Game 6 shifts back to Los Angeles on Saturday.
I thought we got out of the gate quick and asserted the way we wanted the game to be played. They punched back. They're a good team, and we stuck with it and continued to put hard miles on their team, and we found goals up and down our lineup. So it was, I thought, a well-played game.
Well, we're our own team, and we have to write our own stories. We can't rely on what they did to us last year. We have 3 days to go back and regroup. We'll take a day off like any other team in the league would, and we'll have a good practice, and we'll get ready to play. We have to bring, I'm sure their coach was saying the same thing last year, we have to bring our best to Game 6 to even have an opportunity at the series.
Could you just imagine an Oilers versus Leafs Stanley Cup final this season? Wouldn't that be something? Well, we had sunshine mixed with cloud today and fairly warm in Lethbridge. There is a chance, however, of some moisture developing. We'll have the details for you coming up after the break. It was another mild day across much of southwestern Alberta today. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, the mercury may dip a little soon, however, with a chance of more moisture developing?
Yes, we're looking at a 60% chance of showers this evening. More showers also expected on a Thursday with possibly a little bit of flurry action there as well. Now, Thursday, as I mentioned earlier, going to be our cooler day for the whole week. We are sitting at 12 degrees only for Thursday. As we get to the rest of the week, we are above seasonable averages there. So 19 for a high on Friday, up to 22 degrees on Saturday with plenty of sunshine. Look at those temperatures on Sunday. High of 25 degrees and looking at a high of 28 by a Monday. Could that be a record breaker? We'll wait and see. 22 for a high on Tuesday as we round out that 7-day forecast. Now the average high for this time of year, 15 degrees. We're going to be well above that soon. 1 degree for the average low. 27 was our high temperature back in 1992 on this day. We're going to be sitting higher than that by next week. Excited for that. Minus 13 was our cold day back in 1967. That was a record breaker. 6:18, that's when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening at 8:41 p.m. We're looking at 14 hours and 23 minutes of daylight now. Okay, so Victoria sitting at 17 degrees, going to feel a bit cooler by the water, more like 13, but mainly sunny skies. Lots of sunshine also expected in Vancouver. Could see some fog dissipating in the morning there. 16 for a high and 30k winds near the Harrow Strait. Okay, at 12 degrees for a high in Edmonton tomorrow with 30% chance of morning showers, but Calgary, we're looking at morning flurries. 13 for a high there and 20 to 40k winds. As we look to Saskatoon, we're looking at 30 to 50k winds there. 14 for a high, partly cloudy skies. Regina, high of 12 degrees. Morning showers, but in the afternoon, fairly windy. Looking at winds at 20, gusting to 40, and then gusting to 60k. 12 for a high also in Winnipeg. Winnipeg seeing some shower activity as well. Okay, Toronto is seeing a frost advisory in effect this evening, but mainly sunny skies tomorrow, high of 13. 15 for a high in Ottawa with clear skies and clearing in Montreal as well with a high of 13 degrees. We are expecting some wet conditions on the East Coast tomorrow. Fredericton looking at 13 degrees. Chance of showers, morning showers expected as well in Halifax tomorrow with a high of 12 degrees. Cooler by the water though, more like 8 degrees. 8 for a high in Charlottetown with showers and going to feel cooler, more like 4 degrees with those onshore winds. Temperature sitting steady at 1 degree in St. John's, Newfoundland tomorrow, but feeling warmer as you get further inland. Okay, there you have it. That is your forecast.
Today's weather report is brought to you by Ridge Utilities, providing competitive rates for electricity, natural gas, and internet, while investing back in communities across southern Alberta.
Rogers Communications is reporting a 30% increase in profit for the first quarter. The telecommunications company's profit hit close to $511 million. That compares to $392 million for the same period last year. This was the last quarter before Rogers officially combines with Shaw, which it purchased in March for $26 billion. The deal only received final government approval to move forward earlier this month. Calgary-based Cenovus Energy is reporting a drop in first quarter profit. The energy company lowered its production guidance for the year and raised its dividend while reporting first quarter profit of $636 million. Now that is down from $1.6 billion in the same quarter last year. The company says it now expects upstream production for this year to be between 790 and 810,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day. That is down from its December production of between 800 and 840,000. British regulators have blocked the biggest tech deal in history. The block came over worries that Microsoft's purchase of video game maker Activision Blizzard would stifle competition in the fast-growing cloud gaming market. The all-cash deal faced stiff opposition from Sony. It is also being scrutinized by regulators in both the United States and Europe over fears that it would give Microsoft control of popular game franchises like Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, and Candy Crush. Microsoft and Activision Blizzard have vowed to appeal the ruling. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 73 points on the day to finish at 20,366. The Dow was down 228 points to 33,301. The S&P 500 was down 15 on the day to 4,055, and the Nasdaq was up 55 points to 11,854. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down $2.77 to $74.30 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 19 cents to $2.12 US. Gold was down $8.35 on the day to $19.89.04 US an ounce. and silver was down a cent to $24.88 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.38 per bushel, barley's at $9.12, canola's at $16.72, and corn is at $10.47 per bushel. Live cattle were up 23 cents to $174.53. Feeder cattle were up 60 cents to $202.68. And lean hogs meat contract was up $1.40 to $78.28. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.31 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith made a pledge on Wednesday, a pledge to not raise taxes. Smith says that includes both personal and business taxes. That is, if she and her party are re-elected next month in the upcoming provincial election. Smith also made a promise to not introduce a provincial sales tax if re-elected. You know, the latest polls say the UCP and NDP are running neck and neck, and there's also a large number of undecided voters here in Alberta. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have details shortly in an interview with BCN's Jeanette Rocher. Listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, as Albertans wait for the writ to drop, an election kickoff is expected May the 1st, which means we should see about a 4-week election. Here to discuss the upcoming election along with other provincial headlines is National Post correspondent for Alberta Legislature, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, welcome back. Great to have you on.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so Tyler, the polls show that Rachel Notley and Danielle Smith are neck to neck, although the seat distribution tends to favor Smith over Notley, right? So on the ground, what does that look like? Calgary seems to be that real battleground area, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the polling sort of shows them within a couple percentage points of each other, like 47 to 44, 47 to 45, that kind of thing. So very, very close in terms of vote intention at this point. But you're right, the seat distribution does make this a little bit easier for the UCP to come up with a majority here. Edmonton tends to be the New Democrat stronghold, and rural and small town Alberta tends to be the UCP stronghold, which leaves us with Calgary. And Calgary went to the New Democrats in 2015. Went to the UCP in 2019. So the question is sort of going to be, what can each party do to pick up votes in Calgary in this election? Because that is, you know, other than a few seats maybe in sort of the donut around Edmonton, a couple seats in, you know, Lethbridge maybe in Fort McMurray, most of those are likely to go to the Conservatives. So a little bit of electoral math I expect happening in the sort of planning rooms for the folks behind these campaigns.
So is this where we're likely to see more of that door-knocking campaigning as the two vie to be the next premier?
That seems likely. Yeah, you know, both parties are planning on having their actual election headquarters in Calgary, and I do expect the sort of bulk of it to play out in Calgary. You know, there's going to be campaigns in Edmonton, especially in the sort of ring of the suburb ring in, you know, sort of St. Albert, Sherwood Park, those kinds of areas. But no doubt the biggest focus, the most door knocking, is going to be in the Calgary area.
Okay, interesting. Should be very interesting to see what happens. And it's also notable that both Notley and Smith have been premier before, right? And interestingly enough, Alberta has had more female premiers than any other province, with 3 now. It's interesting.
Yeah, you know, Alberta's had this really long tradition of women in politics. You know, some of the famous 5 from Alberta. I believe Alberta was the first province to have women in the legislature. And as you said, yeah, 3 women as premier: Alison Redford, Danielle Smith, and Rachel Notley. And, you know, when you compare that to a place like Ontario, they've only had 1, Kathleen Wynne. Quebec, only 1 with Pauline Marois. So just sort of an interesting dynamic maybe in this election. Of course, this isn't the first election that's been fought between 2 women leading the 2 big parties. In 2012, when Alison Redford won, she was actually facing off against Danielle Smith, who was the leader of the Wild Rose Party at the time. So, you know, nothing new necessarily, but it is sort of notable, I think, in the Canadian context that this is territory that not a lot of other provinces have been in before.
That's very interesting. Okay, so big announcement. Calgary on its way to getting a new arena for the Flames, but it's leaving the taxpayers of Alberta pocketing a big chunk of this, isn't it, Tyler?
Yeah, about $300 million. The whole shebang is going to cost $1.2 billion or something like that. And, this isn't just an arena. It's an event space, and there's a community rink nearby. And the provincial government seems to be paying for some of these sort of associated infrastructure, transit, roads, bridges, things like that. Yeah, big chunk of money. And, we just talked about Calgary being the focus of this campaign. And I think this is a relatively good example of that. You've Danielle Smith coming out saying the province is going to put up $300 million, but that money is going to be contingent on the UCP winning another mandate. So, a critic might say that's blackmail. A party strategist might say that's simply savvy politics. That's the sort of thing that happens on the campaign trail. But no doubt this is going to be one of those things that's talked about in Calgary, because public money for arenas has not been super popular in Calgary in the past. So you have to wonder whether or not it's going to be popular this time around. You have to wonder if that cost is going to start to balloon as it has in the past. Lots of sort of issues percolating around here. But I think certainly when you look at this through the frame of the coming election, this is without a doubt the UCP trying to do something that's going to get them on Calgary's radar.
Alberta has recently opposed the federal government's new firearms legislation, but the province upped the ante again. So Tyler, can you tell us more about this?
Sure. So the province has, as you mentioned, sort of long been opposed to this, saying that going after law-abiding firearms owners is not about to make anybody safer. And the federal government is sort of moving along in how it's going to manage its gun buyback program. And they've, reached an agreement, I believe, with the Canadian Shooting and Ammunition Association, I think it's called. So what the Alberta government did is basically said that, look, if anyone's going to participate in this program within the province, they're going to need to be licensed by the province. And of course, if they don't issue any of those licenses, then in theory, no one will be able to participate, whether that's police officers or administrative staff with a police force, something like that. So, it's hard to say exactly how the federal government's going to respond, whether or not this is the sort of thing the Alberta government can even do or stop. But it's certainly a bit of a confrontational stance that is being taken here. And again, in the context of the election, this is the sort of thing that is likely to be popular among some UCP supporters.
Mm-hmm. Now, speaking of the UCP is considering involuntary treatment for people with addictions issues. But Danielle Smith has said such a thing would be a, quote, last resort. And the idea has been extremely controversial, hasn't it, Tyler?
It has, and British Columbia, I believe, is considering the same thing. So, simply put, involuntary treatment would be not get arrested necessarily, but you would get seized and put in a treatment facility. The idea being that, Danielle Smith has said sort of there's maybe a line in the sand that needs to be drawn on these things. And this might be the line where people are forced into treatment. And of course, as you said, it has been really controversial because critics of this say that, look, this is a violation of individual rights. Like, people have, choices in what they do in life, and why should the government be stepping in to put a stop to this? This isn't a sure thing. The government says it's still doing lots of consultation on it. I'm sure there's going to be legal and charter issues that arise from such a program if it goes ahead. So not set in stone yet, but certainly another part of this conversation about the drug issue in the province right now, which is obviously on a lot of people's radars these days.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. Okay. Last week, Smith faced more criticism for refusing to take follow-up questions from reporters. Now, Tyler, as journalists, this is a serious matter, isn't it?
It's a bit of a pain. Yeah. You ask a politician a question and usually you expect a follow-up. Often they'll sort of slide away from your first question. That's just sort of part of the business, and you try and pin them down a little bit with your follow-up. And Danielle Smith has sort of changed this. It's not a hard and fast rule. I don't think it's written in stone anywhere, but it's sort of convention that you take one question, one follow-up. And the Premier is now taking only one question, which is a bit of a problem. And of course, it's not totally clear to me if that's going to continue on the campaign trail when there's going to be tons of questions. And Rachel Notley's actually found herself in another similar sort of issue, and she's not been taking questions from certain media outlets, the Western Standard news magazine among them. So both of the contenders for the Premier's office playing a little bit of hardball with the media in the last week or so.
Right, and not only that, but last week the Premier Smith was in Lethbridge, and she didn't take any media questions whatsoever, not just follow-ups, just none whatsoever. So that was a little bit hard. Okay, so here's an interesting one, Tyler. The NDP are proposing a ban on school exams during religious and cultural periods. So can you explain more about this?
Sure, yeah. So the idea is, say it's Eid or say it's Yom Kippur or something like that, and you have to write a big exam while trying to observe religious traditions, maybe, attend a ceremony or something. Lunar New Year was another one that was mentioned. So the idea would basically be that the exams for students should be pushed to non-religious or cultural holidays. Of course, for Christians and Catholics and most of their holidays are already holidays. No one is sitting and writing an exam on Christmas or Easter Monday kind of thing. But this just sort of, if it becomes policy, should the NDP win the election, would just sort of broaden some of the accommodations made for religious groups. And, in a lot of cases, these are already accommodated on sort of an individual level. It's not that hard for a math teacher to push an exam to another day or something like that. But this would just sort of codify it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Would that be for all students or just students that practice those religions?
It's a good question. And I'm not sure that the policy has been, sort of developed that far yet. I imagine that's the sort of thing that would come up in the legislation's development and implementation and regulations and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, you're right. Who's going to be making these decisions? It's a good question.
Yeah. Okay, so Tyler, there's been a bit of drama in the oil sands lately. The Alberta Energy Regulator is being grilled over what it knew and when in regards to the Kearl oil sands mine. And so what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so basically there was a spill into the, I think, at the Basca River. And it's been quite controversial because Indigenous groups up there were saying that they weren't warned in an expedient fashion. And it's not sort of clear when the Alberta Energy Regulator knew and when Imperial Oil knew and who was told. And so there's all this sort of all these questions about what exactly happened. And so the CEO of the regulator has been before a House of Commons committee this week trying to answer some of these questions. But there's another thing that's been happening too, which is that there's been a bunch of dead birds found at, I believe it was a Suncor site. And, of course, anyone who's followed the news in Alberta for the last 20 years probably knows that this is a thing that happens occasionally, and there's a little bit of controversy every time it happens. So not, a super good week in public relations for some of the big players in the oil sands.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Alberta has finally committed to net zero emissions by 2050, Tyler. But according to critics, it doesn't have much of a plan to get there, does it?
That's right. That's what the critics are saying. This puts the good thing about this, which pretty much everyone agrees on, is that this puts the province on sort of the same trajectory as the rest of the country. But in terms of how to get there, what the targets are, there hasn't been as much information on that. And so critics are not super pleased that there aren't, intermittent targets or something like that. And one of the interesting things about it, too, is Sonia Savage saying that, look, we need to do more study, we need to do more consultation. And of course, critics are saying, you've been in government for 4 years, you could have been doing that all along. Why do you need more time? So, better late than never, I think, is probably where people are coming down on it. But not everyone super happy with the sort of pace and the targets that could be set out.
Okay, so Tyler, of course, with election time, everyone's talking about NDP and UCP, but there are a number of smaller parties as well that are running in this election. Can you talk about that a little bit? How will they fare against the NDP and UCP? They're kind of the big dogs here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the safe money's on them not really mattering all that much. In previous elections, we've talked about there being threats from the left to the New Democrats and threats from the right to the United Conservatives. There was a period of time there when it looked like maybe some of the independence parties were going to pull some votes away from the UCP.
Right, almost split that vote a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there in the past, of course, there have been votes pulled from the New Democrats by, say, the Alberta Liberal Party, the Alberta Party, who, even had people in the legislature relatively recently. So, these parties do still exist. They are still out there. But most of the polling shows them at like 1 or 2% of the popular vote. So pretty unlikely, I think, that you're going to see any of those parties have a really big impact. I think most people on the left and the right are going to sort of look at how close this election could be and just sort of line up behind the biggest players and say, look, I'm not going to vote Alberta party if that risks a United Conservative winning in this riding kind of thing. So I for better or worse, I think those parties in this election at least are mostly non-players. That could change in the future, of course. Parties do ebb and flow and make comebacks, but at the moment I would say with I think some confidence that they're not going to have a huge impact.
All right, it'll be interesting to see what happens come the end of May. Tyler Dawson, that's about all the time we have today, but thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Many of us know someone who is struggling with Alzheimer's, dementia, or memory loss. So why are these illnesses on the rise, and is there a way to reduce the likeliness of this happening to you? Well, today's guest has some timely advice on this topic. Dr. John Colbert, he's been a board-certified family practice doctor for more than 25 years and a New York Times best-selling author. His latest book is called Dr. Colbert's Healthy Brain Zone: Reverse Memory Loss and Reduce Your Risk of Dementia and Alzheimer's. Long title, but it's so important. Welcome to Bridge City News, Dr. Colbert. Great to have you on today.
Thank you. It's great being here.
Awesome. Okay, so first off, can you give us a brief snapshot of your book and how can we reverse memory loss? How is that possible?
Well, first of all, realizing because we're seeing so much Alzheimer's nowadays, it's only going to get worse because it's following two major epidemics here in the U.S., in Canada, and throughout the world. It's following the obesity epidemic and the diabetes epidemic. And now, of over 100 million people in the U.S. have either diabetes or prediabetes, or almost a third of our population. And those trends are following in most other countries too. And what Alzheimer's is many times it's just, as we call it now, type 3 diabetes or insulin resistance of the brain, where many times the brain just can't take in enough glucose, which is the fuel for the brain. So again, what we do, there's 6 types of Alzheimer's disease, and most people don't realize. They think it's just one type, but there's 6 types. There's 4 kinds of dementia, and Alzheimer's is the number one cause of dementia. About 70% of dementia is caused by Alzheimer's. So I break this down. I teach people how they can screen themselves to see if they have early dementia or if they just have some age-associated memory impairment. And so then we start them on a program on how to heal the brain. The most amazing thing is back in the 1990s, we discovered that the brain has plasticity. In other words, the brain can literally be restored and renewed. We can regrow new neurons, new dendrites, new synapses in the brain. So the brain has the ability to self-repair if we catch the process early enough in the disease process. Once that beta amyloid, that goo, that is all that scar tissue, has accumulated to a degree, it's kind of like picturing a raisin versus a beautiful plump grape. When that grape actually gets dehydrated and forms a raisin, well, eventually that's what happens to the brain with scar tissue and beta amyloid. And when we don't have enough hormones, hormones are amazing for the brain, especially for men, testosterone, and for women, both testosterone and estrogen. But other key hormones, these hormones repair the neurons, repair the synapses, and prevent shrinkage of the brain. And it's something I use commonly. I have to optimize those hormones.
That's fascinating.
But there's other factors involved. There's these powerful plasticity hormones that help the brain regrow and rewire, such as brain-derived neurotrophic factor and nerve growth factor. These are powerful growth factors that are stimulated through certain nutrients and hormones like testosterone and estrogen, but also through intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting is one of the most powerful things we can do that'll help boost the brain-derived neurotrophic factor to start to heal the brain and the neurons. And so I go in detail of how to do that, as well as the diet for the brain. The most powerful diet for the brain is the healthy ketogenic diet. Now, 99% of keto diets are unhealthy because they have tremendous amounts of inflammatory foods like butter and cheese and big slabs of meat and bacon and lard and stuff like that, which is terrible and inflammatory. So what I do is I put people on a healthy keto diet with lots of healthy plant oils like olive oil and avocado oil and nuts and seeds, as well as fish oils. These are really healthy for the brain. Lots of veggies, lots of fiber. But what I take away is the sugar. The brain craves sugar, but sugar is detrimental to the brain. It literally ages the brain and creates insulin resistance to the brain. So the diet is absolutely critical for the brain, as well as intermittent fasting. And then I go into all the different nutrients we need for the brain, the lifestyle factors like exercise, sleep. Sleep is critical for the brain. Did you know that sleeping on your side actually removes the most beta amyloid from the brain? Sleeping on your side can remove 10 to 20 times more beta amyloid from the brain. And so many people just sleep on their back or on their tummy, but sleep on your side, that is the key, and then well oxygenated sleep.
So it's a good thing. It's a good thing then to sleep on your side.
Yes, it is. For the brain, it's very good. But what the brain needs more than any nutrient is oxygen. And so many people are losing their memory over the age of 60 because they're not getting enough oxygen to their brain because they have sleep apnea. And it's their palate is sagging down and they're gasping for air, but they're not realizing it and they're forgetting. They're starting to forget. And just simply losing weight or a CPAP or an Inspire device can correct that. It's real simple. So I teach them all the key things. And usually it's the little things we miss that can totally restore the memory.
Now, that is quite the snapshot of your book there in 5 minutes, but I have a question. So you're saying it's almost like an epidemic right now following these horrible diseases like diabetes, but is it because we have so much of a larger aging population right now with the boomers getting older, or is there something more to it? Is it because there's more chemicals in our food and or is it bad health choices? Is it a combination?
It's all of the above. It's all of the above. It's our obesity epidemic. It's our type 2 diabetes, our pre-diabetes epidemic. It's our bad food choices. When we sit down at a meal and we choose that French fries and that deep fried chicken or anything deep fried that's highly inflammatory to the brain, you are inviting Alzheimer's into your brain. And then when they come by with that beautiful dessert tray with all that beautiful chocolate cake, that key lime pie, that ice cream, that's highly inflammatory to the brain. So every choice we make can invite death or Alzheimer's into the brain, or dementia, or health into the brain. And that's why I choose living foods. I choose lots of olive oil, lots of veggies, healthy proteins, not deep fried.
Yeah, so like the plant-based almost?
Yes, it's so simple. I made it so simple you can't miss it. But if you let your flesh lead you and your sweet tooth, I have too many people tell me, oh, I've got a sweet tooth. I have to have it. No, you don't. You don't want to have Alzheimer's. Every time you make the wrong choices, you are sowing seeds in your brain for Alzheimer's disease. You need to choose living foods so that you can invite life and not have Alzheimer's, not choose Alzheimer's or dementia into your brain. It's real simple.
And we're hearing a lot today about mind and gut, that connection. And so like the healthy gut leading to a healthier brain and vice versa. So it sounds like you're also suggesting that the key ingredient to fighting that memory loss isn't prescriptions or unnatural treatments, but rather in a healthy gut-friendly diet, basically, right?
Absolutely. In fact, a few years ago, I wrote a book called The Healthy Gut Zone, teaching about the key items that harm the gut, which mainly it's antibiotics and antibiotics in the foods we eat, which, by the way, 80% of the antibiotics in our country are given to livestock and chickens. So when you eat those animals, you're getting antibiotics and it's destroying your good bacteria and creating leaky gut, which is eventually can lead to a leaky brain, and so or leaky blood-brain barrier. So again, it's just putting the right foods in and realize your gut, there's a powerful gut-brain connection, but what is good for the gut is good for the brain. And that's why these gut healthy foods that I talk about are extremely beneficial to the brain, especially those healthy oils. I talk about olive oil being one of the best you can do.
Right.
But you want to get the extra virgin high polyphenol olive oils. Those are wonderful for your gut and your brain.
Right. And of course, like now that we're well into 2023, many of us looking for ways to maintain that good health or keep those resolutions that we made back in the beginning of January to start living that healthier lifestyle. So it's obviously, you're saying it's so important for people to understand that inner workings of the brain. So if the path to cognitive health is through a proper diet, what kinds of foods do we need to stay away from? And you were saying like fats, lards, sugar, basically all the stuff that we love. How do we do this and make it simple?
Well, what you have to do is you're going to have to fall in love with olive oil and bring olive oil as a large part of your diet, as well as avocado oil, cold process or cold press avocado oil and other oils and nuts and seeds. Those should be your filler foods. And like I'll get a keto type bread and I'll pour olive oil all over it, and I can start a meal with that, which has got hardly any carbs in it. It has lots of healthy fats in it. So literally it pre-fills you so you can't eat excessive amounts of food. And then start with a nice salad and pour your olive oil on it, not just 1 tablespoon. I'll put 4 to 5 tablespoons of olive oil on my salad. Now you can add some vinegar to it too, or lemon or whatever else, but use a lot of that olive oil. It is so good for you and it pre-fills you so you are full. And so that's one of the healthiest oils for the brain and to decrease inflammation in the body. But that is important. But the most important thing for our brain, the one single thing more important to prevent and reverse Alzheimer's disease is regular exercise. Another thing that so many people put on their New Year's resolution is exercise. They start with good intentions, but they never fulfill it or carry it out. So it's important for the brain to start that exercise program and continue it at least 5 days a week for 20 to 30 minutes. Extremely important.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And you also mentioned fasting earlier. So intermittent fasting, it's one way to improve our healthy brain zone. So what does this mean exactly? What does it look like? How do we do that? What exactly does fasting do for us too? Is it almost like hitting a reset button or something?
Well, good question. Well, Jesus taught us in Matthew chapter 6, he taught us when we fast. He also taught us when we pray, when we give, but when we fast, we're expected to fast. But the patients that have the least disease that I see are the ones who practice intermittent fasting on a regular basis, at least 4 to 7 times per week. And you can do this. Generally, most people will do they'll eat in a 10-hour window and they'll fast for 14 hours a day. Usually, which means if they stop eating at 6 at night, they will go until about 8 the next morning, which will be 14 hours. Excuse me. That's 14 hours.
Okay, so it's not as bad as it sounds. It's not as bad as it sounds. Okay.
You generally just skip. You can compress that time and eat your breakfast later, eat your dinner earlier. That's all it is. And so many people only eat 2 meals a day.
Right.
And by doing so, it unleashes this major process in the body where our body undergoes a condition called autophagy, in which we start to clear out abnormal proteins, including beta amyloid. We start to secrete this powerful hormone, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that starts to repair and restore the brain. And we start to recycle cellular components, including proteins and other components, to make new mitochondria, so the brain energy increases, so our brain improves, our mental clarity improves. My patients are amazed at that one single thing, how that improves the brain, probably better than most anything else.
Right. And it almost seems so opposite to what we are used to hearing. We're used to hearing, don't skip meals, don't do the 2 meals a day or the 1 meal a day. You should eat 3 meals, or even like every 2 hours eat something, because it metabolizes you.
We have the scientific support. Used to, we would say, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper. Not anymore. We say, eat a late breakfast, an early dinner, eat, and usually a little 10-hour, 8 or 10-hour window. And then literally you unleash this reparative process in the body and in the brain. And my patients feel absolutely amazing when they make this a habit, at least 4 to 7 days a week, and they feel amazing. And I practice this at least 4 to 7 days a week.
Great. So you mentioned your patients. So what kinds of results are you seeing with this in terms of, are these people actually reversing memory loss?
I had a lady just with early Alzheimer's, and her husband was really upset because he felt he was losing his wife. I put her on the program, and he just called us this past week, and he said, listen, I've got to order what my wife's on because her memory's better than mine now, and I need those same nutrients. So I'm telling you, it works. But also, I put on the exercise program. I put on the intermittent fasting program. I put on the sleeping program. It's a lifestyle program in addition to the nutritional program and the dietary program. And it's so simple, and it doesn't cost much at all.
Okay, and I think that a challenge that a lot of us have is sticking to those new programs, those diet, whether it be exercise, whatever it is. So how do we do this easier? Does it come down to having an accountability partner?
Absolutely. Accountability works wonderfully. If you can, again, your spouse or friend or church groups can do it many times. It's just having that accountability buddy will help people when their flesh is weak, because there'll be times the flesh gets weak and it craves those chips at night, or it's craving that cookie or those crackers or that garbage, I call it, which is garbage to the body. It literally invites disease into the brain and into the body. Wow. So you want to get your nuts, get yourself well stocked. And that's why I have a book that goes with this. My Beyond Keto book talks about the healthy keto diet. And you have to have your cupboards and your fridge stocked with healthy ingredients like the nuts and the seeds and the avocados and the olive oil and the avocado oil. Or else when you get weak, you're going to be reaching for the ice cream and the cookies and the crackers and all the garbage and junk that's garbage to your brain.
Garbage. I love that. That's gonna be my new little catchphrase there. Thank you for that. And thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Colbert. We're out of time, unfortunately.
Well, thank you. And I do have a podcast. They can go to my website at drdrcolbert.com. And I have about 50 or more diseases. I talk about the natural solutions to most every disease on our podcast.
Fascinating. Dr. Colbert is the author of Dr. Colbert's Healthy Brain Zone, Reverse Memory Loss and Reduce Your Risk of Dementia and Alzheimer's. And it's available at drcolberts.com. I'm Jeanette Roche. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks so much for watching.